because we come from communities where the truth doesn't always reach the headlines, but it lives in what we face every day. This is Changing Trends and Times, bringing clarity and context to the issues shaping our lives right now. No spin, no distractions, just real talk rooted in real impact. Now, are you ready to lean in and bring your voices into the conversation? Then, allow me to introduce to you a man committed to asking the questions that matter and breaking it down so we all understand. Your host, Charles King.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Today we began a journey that stretches across generations, a journey shaped by courage, resistance, brilliance, and the unshakable determination of LGBTQ plus Americans who refuse to disappear. Episode 1, The Historical Arc, is more than a look back in time. It is a restoration of memory. It is an acknowledgement that LGBTQ plus history is American history, and that the people who lived it were often forced to fight for the right to simply exist. From early activists who organized quietly in living rooms to the spark of Stonewall that ignited a global movement, to the countless individuals whose names never made the headlines but whose lives made the difference. This episode honors them all. Their stories remind us that progress is never accidental. It is built by people who decide that silence is no longer an option. As we open this series, I invite you to listen with intention, reflect with empathy, and recognize the extraordinary legacy that has shaped the LGBTQ plus experience in America. This is the foundation, the arc that brought us here, and today we honor it. So, ladies and gentlemen, first of all, let me just tell you, this is episode 1 of our series, which is called LGBTQ plus America. With this episode here, the historical arc, what we're going to talk about is we're going to give you guys a rundown on the history of the LGBTQ plus community, because not only is this existence a real thing here in our country, but it's also, you will learn more about the resilience of a group of people that have always, for some strange reason, been marginalized in this country, and no one still really can tell us why. So as we start this episode here of the historical arc, I want to give you guys some context first. And that is, the first thing I want to talk about is the pre-Stonewall context. That is the world before the uprising. To understand what Stonewall meant, one must first understand what America looked like before it. For much of the 20th century, LGBTQ plus identity was not merely stigmatized, it was criminalized at every institutional level. Across dozens of states, sodomy laws made same-sex intimacy a criminal offense punishable by imprisonment. Merely being perceived as gay or gender non-conforming was grounds for arrest, disorderly conduct. Statues were routinely weaponized against queer people, particularly in urban areas where they gathered. Now, as you kind of like hear that, you let that sink in and you think about it. What was the issue about a group of people being who they are, being who they were? Why are we actually talking about what we're talking about is how is it that we can get to the point that for simply existing meant you were you were doing something that was just wrong, and laws were being made just for you. Now, it sounds like something that can identify with an enormous amount of things, but I definitely would love to keep this to what we're talking about when we talk about the LGBTQ series, because this series is one that means so much for an enormous amount of people, but also the actions and the things in place that this is about. You know, it takes us to a point where we realize that these were criminal activities that were being done to people that were naturalized. So the psychiatric establishment provided the ideological scaffolding for this persecution. Until 1973, the American Psychiatric Association listed homosexuality as a mental disorder in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. That's the DSM. Enabling forced institutionalization, electroconvulsive therapy, and chemical castration as state-sanctioned treatments. The cultural message was unambiguous. To be LGBTQ plus was to be broken, deviant, and deserving of correction. Now, how is it that man can make the decision that it can tell people who they should be and what they should be? Now that I know that this is going to go a long ways, because this right here is kind of like, this is crazy actually, because when we think about this, and most of us have people in our families that are a part of the LGBTQ plus community. And to just think about this, do we think that that was correct? Do we think that that was a corrective action for those that were coming up in the early 70s into the 80s to have this this conversion therapy? And I've actually talked to some people that actually went through that. Their families sent them to this camp and said that they needed to be converted. Now, who decides what a person can be and is to be? Now, why are we taking rights from people that are not conforming to what other people do? Because I want you to think about this. If we were all the same, what would this world be like? But you also have to remember, especially those that come from the religious perspective, you know, they will sit there and they will tell you that that this is that these are things that are against the Bible, and that's not in the Bible, and things of that nature, you know, which, you know, we know that there are people that like to pick parts of the Bible to make things conform to what they want it to be, to make it in their favor, because this is how they want to see things. But I think to be open and to think about, when we think about what happened at Stonewall, you know, as we're starting this out, what was so wrong about people being in a place and doing the things that they like to do, not breaking any laws that allows, police action, police force to come into an establishment where people are gathered, they're having fun, they're enjoying themselves, but you come in and you start beating and arresting people. I mean, there's a lot of relativity to that, and things that happen, you know, that led up to what we have today here in the 21st century when we talk about civil rights. But what would make this be lawful to do this to people? You know, I think when we go back to what we talk about here in the 1950s, that brought Lavender Scare alongside McCarthyism, the federal government, driven by Senator Joseph McCarthy and his allies, purged thousands of gay and lesbian federal employees, branding them as security risks on the logic that their moral weakness made them susceptible to blackmail by Soviet agents. This witch hunt destroyed careers, tore apart families, and drove countless Americans deeper into hiding. Now, think about, people creating these kind of lies and making people's lives just horrible, just destroying lives, destroying families. Okay? And it's like, as you think about that, one has to ask the question, what is it about my life that differs from yours? If folk from the LGBTQ community can care less what goes on in your bedroom between you and your wife or you and your girlfriend. And so if they're with their husband, their loved ones, that is whether it's a gay relationship or a lesbian relationship, they can care less what goes on in your bedroom. Why are you caring what goes on in their bedrooms? Now, for those that, can understand some historical context, is that there are those that are in the higher ups of the federal government during this time were actually, were of the gay persuasion, but they were so in the closet and so closeted that they had to stay that way, wanted to stay that way, but wanted to abuse others just to get their point across, to get the eyes and the light off of them. Now, these are known facts, for people in the government at that time. But my thing is, the hypocrisy that was then is just like now, but that hypocrisy, it makes things so horrific because now people don't know if they're going or coming. There's so many things that are playing along to the mental issue lines, and it's causing people a lot of heartache and discontent. If a person is not bothering you and they're living their life, what would make you want to take your time out of your day to get into somebody else's life that you know nothing about, you don't know people, but you are just throwing out little nasty innuendos and just putting stickers on people that are just not necessary. It's not necessary. And so, but to add more to this is for Black LGBTQ plus people, this persecution was compounded. Already subject to the full apparatus of Jim Crow segregation and systemic anti-Black racism, Black queer individuals faced a double invisibility, marginalized with white LGBTQ spaces, erased within Black community narratives that often viewed homosexuality through the lens of respectability and politics. Figures like Bayard Rustin, the brilliant strategist behind the 1963 March on Washington, were literally pushed out of the public view by civil rights leaders who feared that his sexuality would discredit the movement. His erasure was deliberate, calculated, and deeply unjust. Now, I want people to think about that. There would be no March on Washington that took place with MLK's I Have a Dream speech without Bayard Rustin, who so happens to have been a gay male. Not just a gay male, but a gay Black male that organized each and every part of what took place at the March on Washington. But at the end, if you guys saw the movie, which made it more realistic than anything because you could feel that pressure as to You created this, you made this happen, but you can't come to the meeting at the White House because you're gay. That's sad. That is sad. But but makes matters even worse is the friendships that Bayard Rustin had with all of these civil rights leaders. They were all good friends. He and Dr. King in particular. Bayard stayed at their house a lot. He knew the kids. He played with the kids. He knew Coretta. I mean, they were all great friends. But when it came down to it, because he was gay, he could not take part in the final part of the whole entire movement that he helped to create. He couldn't take place because he was gay. Now, when we talk about disrespect is just one of those things that, it goes a lot of ways. But, I think that these people thought that because these people were a part of the LGBTQ community, that they were not going to find a way to fight back and to get back and get what was theirs, regardless of the case, because it comes a point that you cannot dictate what people's lives are going to be like, tell them what they can and cannot do, but then also at the same time, you're telling them that your life is an abomination. Who does that? Who does that? Oh man. I mean, this is just really sad. So let me just tell you, when we talk about a reckoning that took place here with the LGBTQ plus in American history in Stonewall, there's a version of that history that Americans are allowed to know. It begins at Stonewall that skips to marriage equality and ends with the rainbow flag at a corporation's headquarters every June. It is a story of linear progress, eventual triumph, and political resolution. It also, in critical ways, a lie of omission. The history of the LGBTQ plus Americans is no longer harder and more profoundly connected to the history of race and class in this country than most mainstream narratives acknowledge. And in 2026, with transgender rights under sustained legislative assault, Supreme Court decisions on marriage and privacy being questioned from within the court itself, and a generation of young queer Americans navigating institutions that were never designed to protect them, the full truth of this history is not merely interesting, it is necessary. And it is necessary because you got a lot of the justices, but the one justice that sits on the Supreme Court that really continues this problem is Clarence Thomas. Clarence Thomas is actually trying to get the court to go back and open up the approval of same-sex marriage and have that null and void. Now, there's two issues I think that comes with that. One, how is he going to actually go back and have them to roll this back when simply, you got some states, especially southern states, that would love that because they cherry pick so over the Bible that they have now intertwined politics and religion so that, now, if you're talking about how you love Jesus all the time and all of these other good things, these people are the people that's causing the harm. It's the same everyday church folk, along with these political figures that are trying to disrupt, disengage, and destroy families because they're not that traditional family of a man and a woman. That's right. They're trying to roll back marriage equality and say, this is null and void, and you are not allowed, dead serious, You are not allowed to have that privacy in your house because it's man and man or it's woman and woman. So therefore, the government should actually intervene into your life because you don't know what you're doing. You don't know what your life is supposed to be. So they want to come in and they want to be able to, if they roll up in your house, just bust in the doors. And this is I don't mean this to be the way it looks, but let's say you and your partner are actually making love. You're going to be arrested and go to jail if they get the chance to roll this back. This is like what they did back in the 50s. So they want to roll this all the way back. That fight is real. People need to stay on top of that because I will tell you this. You know, even though it is legal, I can tell you that excluding Southeast and Southwestern states, that is from Florida all the way back across to Louisiana, and you know, then that does include Tennessee and Arkansas. They are, if they had their way, if that was to happen, I can guarantee you those people that got married in those states, your marriage would be null and void if they got a chance to take this away. But I doubt if the states that's around the Southeast and Southwest would do that same thing. There may be a few states far and few in between, but I can say the majority of those 39 states outside of the Southeast, I doubt very seriously that they will do that. But if you got married in the Southeast, you know, believe me, in Southwest, you really need to stay abreast of what's happening when it comes to these laws, because these people are really trying to take away your right to be married to the person that you love. It's a really horrible thing. And so as we talk about this and we move over to, let me tell you guys about the Stonewall Uprising. This took place June 28th, 1969. It says, in the early hours of Saturday, June 18th, 1969, New York City police raided the Stonewall Inn and mafia-owned gay bar at 5153 Christopher Street in Greenwich Village. Raids on gay bars were routine. The police used them as performances of control, arresting patrons from indecency and revealing in the humiliation. But on this night, something different happened. The patrons of Stonewall, many of them trans women, drag queens, homeless queer youth, and people of color, pushed back. First with jeers, then with coins and bottles, then with fists. The uprising lasted 6 nights and drew hundreds of participants. It galvanized a generation of activists and led directly to the founding of the Gay Liberation Front and the Gay Activist Alliance. A year later, the first gay pride marches commemorated the anniversary of Stonewall. The modern LGBTQ rights movement had a birth date. But here's the truth about that mainstream narrative having persistently obscured. The people at the forefront of Stonewall resistance were disproportionately Black and brown, trans and gender nonconforming, working class and homeless. Marsha P. Johnson, a Black trans woman from Elizabeth, New Jersey, was among the most visible figures of the uprising and its immediate aftermath. Sylvia Rivera, a Puerto Rican trans activist, fought alongside her. These women were not on the margins of Stonewall. They were its fire. Yet for decades, their roles were minimized or erased as the movement's narratives were shaped by its more palatable, often white and middle-class voices. What Stonewall did not fix was equally significant. Police brutality continued. Sodomy laws remained on the books in many states. Discrimination in housing and employment was unchallenged. by federal law, and the most vulnerable members of the LGBTQ plus community, trans women of color, homeless queer youth, remain profoundly unprotected. Stonewall was not an ending, it was the beginning, and a contested one. Now, there's another variable here that's being added, and that is when you look at the uprising and you hear the story the way it's been told, is that you had nothing but the white LGBTQ community that was fighting this battle, but apparently that's not true. Apparently that's not true. And so what we're finding is that, you know, the movement is the movement, the results are the results, but the ending is where this all gets to where it's where the ending result is what appears to be the thing that's a mainstay, and that is now the right to be married is the ultimate that has taken place. But I think the moral to the story is that those that really put in that fight, and that was more of a part of that battle, a lot of people, especially in the LGBTQ community, would not know just how in depth this was. Because in just reading this and knowing this, why is it that the community is still at this point was not complete, where it was more of a cohesive thing to give that credit? What do you, I'm not sure what happened there, but I think this is something else that deserves to be noted, to be researched, and to ask and to find out a whole lot more as to the people that really fought this battle. Why are we not hearing more about these people? Because if that's the case, then, you know, there are some questions that's got to be answered, you know, within the community itself. How many of you agree with that? Because this was a lot. This was a whole lot. And there's a lot about this historical context that really starts to change an enormous amount of things. So let's go to and let's talk about the AIDS crisis. Because, you know, what was it, 1981 to present? Because this was a part of life that, you know, it started out where it affected just one community. But as we get over time and we go over time, it actually affects the whole entire world. It does not matter if you're gay or straight. Does not matter if you're black or white. Does not matter if you are African, Australian, Filipino, Vietnamese, Chinese, Italian, Spanish. It does not matter. This does not discriminate. And when this thing took off in 1981, it took off like a wildfire. And how was it being categorized in the media? The gay disease. And for being gay, again, led to something else that caused a problem on a people that had no control as to what happened, how this began, how it got out, how it even started to spread. I think what actually led to that, and again, you know, historical data would not say, but it seems like because the first group of people that really contracted this disease, this slash virus, so happened to have been people of the LGBTQ community. So when we talk about the AIDS crisis, this is the one thing that I think when it comes to LGBTQ history is one that's always a mainstay, but has a bigger part as each year passes. The AIDS crisis is one of the most devastating chapters in American history, and one of its most willfully forgotten. The first cases of what will become known as acquired immune deficiency syndrome were reported by the Centers for Disease Control in June of 1981. Within a decade, it would kill tens of thousands of Americans. By the mid-90s, AIDS had become the leading cause of death for Americans between the ages of 25 and 44. President Ronald Reagan did not publicly acknowledge the epidemic by name until 1987, 6 years into the crisis, and after more than 20,000 Americans had already died. The silence was not accidental. AIDS was killing gay men, intravenous drug users, immigrants, and racial minorities, populations that Reagan administration and the religious right were content to regard as undeserving in public sympathy or federal response. Conservative commentators described the epidemic as divine retribution. The Surgeon General's report on AIDS was delayed for years by political interference. Gay Black men were disproportionately affected, facing the triple burden of racism within the healthcare system, homophobia within Black communities, and governmental indifferences to both. Their suffering was doubly erased: too Black for the white gay mainstream, too gay for a Black political establishment still grappling with respectability. Into this vacuum of government failures stepped the community itself. ACT UP, that's AIDS Coalition to Unleash Power. Founded in 1987, used radical direct action, die-ins, protests at the FDA, interruptions of Wall Street trading to force the pharmaceutical industry and the government agencies to accelerate drug trials and lowering the cost of treatment. The name Project AIDS Memorial Quilt, begun in 87 and eventually containing more than 48,000 panels, gave human faces and names to a death toll that officials had rendered statistically. Community organizations provided food, housing, hospice care, and human dignity when the government provided none. The AIDS crisis is not over. Globally, 1.3 million new HIV infections occurred in 2022. The lessons of the AIDS crisis about governmental indifferences, community resilience, the politics of whose life is considered grievable are not historical relics. They are urgently present. Now, this right here is, again, as you just think about this, and this is something I think that has affected pretty much everyone that has a family member here in this world. And as we think about this, this was another part of discrimination that I think really, really should make a whole bunch of people feel more than just shame. Because, to know that there are, at this point in reading this, what happens during the AIDS epidemic, when it really was really in its infantry status, it seems like for gay Black men, again, it was something else that caused a discrimination. But to know that the healthcare system, seems like forever and a day, was not only going to not do its part, but society was not going to do its part. This is where privilege was showing and rearing its ugly head. But, when we think about this, where's the community today? How much more close-knit is the community today than it was then? Now, we're talking about 1987 here, up until 2022 with these new infections of HIV. But where is the community today? Is the community even closer now? I would say, from my understanding of how not only this read, but just when you just talk, two different people to learn of not just of their experience, but how they see things. I don't think it's that close now. I don't think it's that close now. And if it's not that close now, then I'm thinking that everyone needs to be sitting down and doing some work, because the work that needs to be done is that you get a whole lot done when you do it in numbers. But when you're divided, it don't work. It don't work. Because something has to be done as to not just people's living. Because I'm sorry, I say this all the time, and I do mean this. I don't care who you are. If you don't live in my house, you're not going to come in my house and tell me what I'm going to do in my house. I'm sorry. That's just not going to happen. That's not going to happen. If you're not wanted in my house and I find you in my house, oh, you going out. You going out. You will be out. But to just know that people could do this and get away with this in the 50s, 60s, rolling into the 70s, going into the 80s, they were actually doing this. I tell you, people, it does not matter who you are, because I think each and every community has got something that's going on that everybody needs to reflect on, and everybody needs to contribute to building it. Everybody needs to do that. But when you have segregations or segregated parts of a community that's even worse off than the community as a whole, that tells you right there that those little segregated pieces that are off from the actual community itself, they're going to have to work extra hard and need to understand what it means when you say you need to come together and you need to build a community. Because believe it or not, that kind of hatred and that kind of behavior, that is taught. That is taught. Because it's taught, that doesn't mean that's an excuse to forgive, or I ain't gonna say forgive, but that's a part to excuse that kind of behavior. Because that kind of behavior is never excusable. It's never excusable. But you see, now with all of these new infections of HIV, and they're making them all so culturally centered towards the LGBTQ community, again, they're adding more and more variables to the community that don't need to be there. Now, it's a fact that, everybody could do better when we're talking about the care and not wanting to get into these kind of situations, because it's definitely something, again, that's not warranted, because we can do a whole lot better. We can do a whole lot better. We know that there's not going to be 100% of the people here, no matter if you're part of a community or if you're just who you are individually. We know that 100% of the people in this world are not going to be perfect when it comes to their fitness, when it comes to what they eat, when it comes to how they live, the lifestyle that they want to live. Nobody's going to be 100% there. You got some that just may indulge sometimes when they want to do whatever they want to do. My thing is that if you ever want the change, then you have to be the change that you want to see. Now, the LGBTQ community can be that example that it wants to see if it too unites and do the things that it has to do in order to lead this world. Because I will say this is, you know, I have this thing where I just believe that just given the opportunity, the real opportunity of a real leader, for someone that's a part of the LGBTQ community, that if they had the real opportunity to lead this world, my opinion, I think it would be a whole lot different and a whole lot better. It can't be no worse than the folk that's been here already, that's already causing chaos, disorder, discontent, with thievery, all kind of manipulations and killing people and just doing everything that's just wrong. I'm saying to the LGBTQ community, get your stuff together. Get your stuff together, because the history here shows that when people do want to come together and do what they need to do, there's numbers there. The thing is, you got to get out your own way. Let the bigotry go. Let the bigotry go. Because if you can't let the bigotry go, then the bigotry is going to continue to hold you back. And it's holding you back for what reason? So let's talk about the legal turning points here in this historical text with the courts and the civil rights. Let's start with the case in 1986, Bowers v. Hardwick. The Supreme Court upheld a Georgia sodomy law, ruling 5-4 that there was no constitutional right to engage in homosexual sodomy, a catastrophic blow that legitimized state criminalization of gay identity for nearly 2 more decades. That is absolutely true. I am here in Georgia, and that law is still on the books. It is still on the books. So all it takes is for one disgruntled, unnecessary, repressed person from law enforcement that so happens to want to find a reason to cause a problem, and that's what he or she can do by using that law if they think it applies and if they can make it apply. Still on the books. How about Lawrence v. Texas in 2003? The court struck down Texas sodomy law 63, explicitly overturning Bowers. Justice Kennedy's majority held that the Due Process Clause protects individuals' rights to private consensual intimacy, regardless of sexual orientation. Sodomy laws across 14 states were invalidated overnight. Okay, now this one was a win for the LGBTQ community. Now, Texas couldn't enforce sodomy as of 2003. This is crazy, right? How about the United States versus Windsor, 2013? The court struck down Section 3 of the Defense of Marriage Act, that's DOMA, which had defined marriage for federal purposes as exclusively between a man and a woman. Eddie Windsor, who had been forced to pay $363,000 in estate taxes after her wife died, taxes a heterosexual spouse would not have owed, won a landmark victory. Federal recognition of same-sex marriages became legally required. Another win for LGBTQ rights. And 2015, Obergefell versus Hodges, 2015. The court ruled 5-4 that the 14th Amendment requires all states to license and recognize same-sex marriages. Jim Obergefell had sought only the rights to be listed as the surviving spouse on his husband's death certificate. His case became the constitutional foundation for marriage equality nationwide. Now, again, this is, these are some things that are really making some differences. And last one here, Bostock versus Clayton County, 2020. The court ruled 6-3 that Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which prohibits employment discrimination because of sex, extends to the discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity. Written by Justice Neil Gorsuch, a conservative Trump appointee, the ruling extended federal workplace protections to millions of LGBTQ plus workers. Now, these are definitely landmark. These are definitely landmark. But what you have to understand is that from what started out back then, from Stonewall coming forward, is that these rights are slowly but surely churning. I understand when you want something to be about you as early as you want it to be, that's what you want. But I want to say this, and I always like to err on the side of caution. When there's a right that you feel is needed, not everything is going to happen overnight. I always suggest is that why not make a plan? Lay down a foundation, work on it and build it, and then present it for what's next. Because I think when you go on the emotional levels for a lot of things, and you're asking, well, why can't I be married? Why can't I have the right to sit in the room of my spouse? Because you have some hospitals in some states that, because if you're not husband and wife, will not allow that. Now, these are things that from a president's status, and just different things that are affecting the LGBTQ community are some things that I think can be worked on, can be made to happen, can be in favor of if they're just done systematically. And I know you say, well, that's not the case if you're heterosexual. Well, let me just tell you this. If you're part of the LGBTQ community, can you tell me, besides what marriage equality has came to be legal and now present around the whole entire country, what was your example prior to your getting married? You didn't have one. So now that you have one, because now that it's legal, this is how I think you will probably want to be thinking about how to live your life. You don't want to live your life like somebody that's heterosexual. I don't think you want that, because there's nothing that's done from the two sides that actually match. When that very first couple got married, there was no example of what it was to be a lesbian married couple in America. There was nothing to set that example. They were the example. They were the living example as they were living their lives. So basically, what I'm saying to you is your culture is being created and you are creating culture as you go along. That's what you follow. What's done over here is not the same as what you do. Marriage is marriage, but you guys have totally different dynamics. Where there's a husband and wife, but then there's husband and husband, or there's wife and wife. Two different things. This is what you build and work on. Because as you build from that, that means you get better, you get better, you get better over time. You see, if you're husband and wife, then this is what you're always going to know because there's always been that example. So what you see for that example definitely might not resonate with you because there's just things that's happening here that one does not equate, but is also something that you're not going to do most likely. So, but with these legal cases, every legal victory listed above was won in the face of fierce opposition and required decades of organizing, litigation, and sacrifice. Long term, build the foundation. And none of them is permanent. In 2022, Justice Clarence Thomas, in a concurring opinion in Dobbs v. Jackson, Women's Health Organization, explicitly called for the reconstruction of Lawrence and Obergefell, the legal ground upon which LGBTQ rights rest is not bedrock. It is contested terrain, and the contest is ongoing. As I said to you, Justice Thomas is the one that's trying to roll back marriage equality. This is the justice that's actually wreaking havoc on the lives of people that he knows nothing about. At least I don't think he knows nothing about. And he is doing this because there are folks spitting in that ear. He's doing it, and if the Chief Justice Roberts decides to take up any of those cases, they're going to be landmark as well, because probably, if they can get folk to side with them on these situations, you've got to be prepared. You have got to be prepared, because if you've done it to get to this point, you're married and you're happy and you're living your happy life. No one needs somebody to come and just all of a sudden disrupt their lives out of nowhere. But this will be a total disruptor. So my whole thing is this. Let me tell you guys about the modern era, the progress, rollback, and mistakes for 26, and then I'll wrap up the show. The 2010s appeared to many to represent arrival of a new era. The repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell in 2010 ended the ban on openly gay and lesbian service members in the military. The Affordable Care Act included protections against insurance discrimination for LGBTQ plus people. The Violence Against Women's Act was reauthorized with explicit LGBTQ plus protections. And in June 2015, when the Obergefell decision came down, millions wept because a struggle that had cost so much for so long had produced something that looked like recognition. But the progress is not linear, and the rights without institutional roots can be reversed with a court appointment for a legislative session. The years following 2016 saw systematic rollbacks, transgender military ban attempts, removal of federal guidance protecting transgender students, and the escalating wave of state-level and anti-trans legislation. Between 2020 and 2026, more than 500 anti-LGBTQ plus bills were introduced across state legislators, the vast majority targeting transgender people and disproportionately transgender youth. So you see, people are still attacking the rights of the LGBTQ plus community. And when I said earlier what I said, I really meant what I said. Where is the community today in its unity? If the community is not there in unity, then these parts where they're picking the meat off the bone like they did the Affordable Health Care Act, are the things that's happening. And they're going to continue to happen until somebody gets the gall to send the right representatives to represent their district to do the job that he or she is supposed to do. And that is, you represent the people, not the interest of a corporation or a company or somebody that's got millions of dollars that they want to put in your pocket and say, this is what I want and I need you to do it for me. Because we know how dark money is when it comes to politics. And we know that things are not going to happen in the LGBTQ plus community unless it's legislatively done. Now, you may have those that do legislation, and they probably put something up that gets passed, but when they pass it, it's not for all. It's only for a particular group. So again, where is the unity? That's not a rhetorical question. That's a real question. Because there are too many people suffering, and because folk feel like either they're entitled, they have money, and they can do whatever they want to do, that it does not matter to them because they know they are included. Let's go back to the beginning when we talked about what happened in the movement there at Stonewall that actually took place, that actually started the foundation of the LGBTQ community in its sturdiness. It was the transgendered trans women that were black and brown. It was the black and brown underserved that were marginalized and homeless, and people of the working class that actually went out and put in the real battle that people really don't know about. Let's talk more about Marsha Jones, and let's get her name out there because we need to know that Marsha Jones mattered. She contributed an enormous amount to this movement, to where we are today. Let's talk about James Baldwin historically has done what he has done for this community. Langston Hughes for this community. There's many others. We've got to be more boisterous about the folk that have got us to this point and stop marginalizing people and be together as one unit. We can do what we need to do. I just say, hey, get out there and do what you got to do. Because this is real and nothing's going to change that. Nothing's going to change that. And so, as we think about this, we've got to think about all the people that are doing the things that we need them to do. So I say, let's band together, and what can happen is what can happen. But I really hope that people can see the forest for the trees, do the things that they need to get done. And I'm openly pulling, for the rights of each and every individual. I'm also pulling, for the hopes that for those that aspire and dream to do big things, I am pulling for you. I am pulling for you because I definitely want to see, people getting the opportunities to do the things that they want to do, how they need to do them, but also succeeding in what it is that they do. Because so many people are not for that. We always got to say it's got to be me before you. It's got to be me before you. It's got to be me before you. Why is that? So in closing, I want to say thank you all for being here. And I'm going to close out with this monologue. As we close episode 1, I'm reminded that history is not just a record of what happened. It is a mirror that shows us who we are becoming. The LGBTQ plus community community's historical arc is filled with pain, triumph, and innovation and resilience. It is a testament to the power of people who dare to live authentically, even when the world told them not to. Their courage built the path we walk today. Their sacrifices opened doors that once seemed permanently locked, and their voices were whispered or shouted, continuing to echo through every movement for justice in this country. This episode is only the beginning. As we move forward in this series, we will explore politics, culture, identity, intersectionality, and the future of the LGBTQ plus life in America and around the world, but none of that makes sense without understanding the history that shaped it. Thank you for joining me in honoring the past. The next chapter awaits. Episode 2 will be the political landscape as to things that took place here in the LGBTQ plus community here in America. And we'll learn a whole lot more about that as we get to our overall goal of what the future holds and how it can be better. I'm your host, Charles King. For those of you that are watching, please, if you have not yet, I ask that you subscribe and you enable all notifications on each as you subscribe, because you'll be able to watch each and every episode. You get the notification, you'll watch it live. All you have to do is just click and watch. And you're also able to go back and watch each and every episode that we have done and learn historical context, as well as the great information that is being put out for you, Mr. and Mrs. America, to be the better you, to help your community to be the best that it can be. I'm your host, Charles King. You guys have a great weekend, and we will see you next Saturday for episode 2, The Political Landscape. Y'all have a great evening.